Welcome back, podcast friends. And in today's episode, I do want to talk about type 2 diabetes, what it is and what causes it. But before I do, I truly want to have a heart to heart with you. And this is something that really does mean a lot to me because this is why I got into the medical field in the first place and also why I got out of the medical field. And the reason why was mainly because of type 2 diabetes and all the horrible misinformation that we've been taught. Like I said, I went to college for 12 years. I did a residency. I worked at a hospital, same hospital for 29 years. And I'm still practicing a little bit, but not in the hospital. And what really made me do this is when I started finding out what all we've been taught all the way through school, through residency, through working, everything that we were taught about diabetes is wrong. And the answer is so simple, but nobody's talking about it. And I don't know why. And this is no little thing because the solution is so simple. But type 2 diabetes is getting worse and worse every single year. Back in 1980, there were just in the United States, there were 108 million people with type 2 diabetes in 1980, 108 million people. Now go to 2014, that went from 108 up to 422 million people in the United States with type 2 diabetes. And now, currently, it's estimated there's around 589 million people that have type 2 diabetes. It's getting worse and worse every year. And the crazy thing is, this is totally preventable. It's totally reversible, stoppable. You can be off all your diabetic medications in less than 4 weeks. It is crazy that we're not telling everybody this. And so that's why I really want you to understand this. First thing I want you to realize, diabetes isn't just like having a kidney issue or a liver issue or high blood pressure or dementia. Type 2 diabetes is an umbrella of all the diseases. Remember, I've talked about the 3 pillars of disease. It's high insulin levels, high inflammation levels throughout your body, and high blood glucose. That's diabetes. The 3 pillars of disease are the 3 pillars of type 2 diabetes. And this can all be cured so easily. And I've already done it with so many people. They've already gotten off their medications, and it is wonderful watching this happen. So the first thing, I'm going to have a few key points that I'm going to bring up to you throughout this talk. This is the first one. Key number 1, the root cause of diabetes is insulin resistance. It is not a high blood sugar. High blood sugar is only a symptom of diabetes. High insulin is what's causing all of this. Now, I know that gets confusing. We'll talk about this later because it's putting glucose in your blood that makes your insulin high in the first place. But as long as you can keep producing insulin and your cells are insulin sensitive, then you're fine. You can handle all that. But that's not what happens. And that's what I'm going to explain to you. So first, the key one, insulin resistance is what type 2 diabetes is. So what is insulin? Insulin is a hormone. It's a hormone that our body produces anytime it senses glucose or senses a sweet taste in our mouth. So that glucose could be in our mouth, in our stomach, in our intestines, and definitely once it gets into our blood, that's where we really get the huge insulin release. Okay, so what does insulin do? Okay, insulin tells the body what to do with all this glucose that you are eating. And I'm going over and over that. The only reason you have a high blood glucose is because you eat it. As soon as you stop eating it, your blood glucose will go down. It's that easy because we don't store a lot of blood glucose. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. So you eat glucose, you put glucose in your mouth, glucose gets in your blood, your body produces insulin to get rid of that. There's 4 different things that your insulin tells your body to do with that glucose. First, since you already have the glucose in your blood, it wants to get it out as soon as possible. So if you're doing any activity right after you eat, you can burn off a little bit of glucose there, but you are not burning up very much glucose at all, especially to what you're taking in. The second thing it'll do is it's going to go and it's going to replenish all its glucose stores. The glucose store of glucose is called glycogen. So think of glycogen as these little glucose bricks, but you don't have very much. 10% of your liver is glycogen stores, and 1% of each skeletal muscle are glycogen stores. That's all you have. And since we tend to eat glucose all the time, usually our glycogen stores are not depleted. The other thing it does is it's just going to eliminate it through the body. It's going to make you pee it out through the kidneys. And this one, you get a level around 150 to 180 milligrams per deciliter. Okay. But for the vast majority, most of the glucose that you eat, and people eat glucose constantly, every 2 to 3 hours, are putting more and more glucose in their mouth. The biggest thing that happens with glucose is insulin tells your liver to turn all that excess glucose into fat in the form of triglycerides. Then insulin tells your body, store those triglycerides in your fat cells. Okay. So that's huge. I know the medical community and food companies try to make you think that eating fat's what makes you fat. It's an outright lie. It is a blatant lie. They know for a fact that's not what causes fat. The only way to gain fat is to have your insulin levels high so you can force the triglycerides into your fat cells and store them. So as long as your insulin levels are high, you're storing glucose. You're storing triglycerides of fat, but those triglycerides came from converting glucose into triglycerides. So if you have high triglycerides, quit eating glucose and your triglycerides will come down. It really is that simple. The answer to all this is just quit eating glucose, but I'll get to that in just a bit. So the main thing that insulin does with your fat, with your excess glucose, is it stores it as fat. And I know that's confusing because insulin only comes when you eat glucose. But what happens is you eat glucose over and over constantly all the time. And when you do, you're making triglyceride after triglyceride. And when you're making all these triglycerides, your body has to store it somewhere. So it stores it in your fat cells. So yes, at first, insulin resistance is started because you're eating glucose, but that's not what ends up happening with insulin resistance. And that's what I really hope to explain to you as I go through this. So this leads us to the key number 2. Okay. So you eat glucose, that causes high insulin, that causes high triglycerides, and that tells you to store fat. So key number 2 that is so important is that high insulin levels force your body to store fat. You cannot burn fat out of your fat cells if your insulin levels are high. But the opposite is also true. With low insulin levels, you're burning the fat out of your fat cells for energy source. You cannot, physiologically, you cannot store fat in your fat cells when your insulin levels are low. So the key to everything, the key to all our diseases, the key to diabetes, the key to everything is keep your insulin levels low. Okay. And I did a whole podcast on this, episode number 34, what determines whether you store fat or burn it for energy. And this is so important for you to realize. So if you haven't heard that, please go back. But it is the fact that high insulin levels force you to burn or to store fat. Low insulin causes you to burn the fat out of your fat cells and use that for your energy like we're supposed to. So what happens? So what happens is you eat glucose, raises your insulin levels. Insulin tells your liver, turn all that glucose into triglycerides. Then insulin tells your fat cells, store all that fat in your fat cells. So you're constantly storing this fat in your fat cells, but you have fat stores all over your body. Your subcutaneous fat cells, you have them all over your body. So you have a lot of fat cells that can hold a lot of fat. And there's a reason for that. And I'll talk about that later. But we can hold a lot of fat. But as each individual fat cell gets stuffed, okay, so you have these triglycerides and they're floating around in your blood in these fat mobiles called VLDLs and LDLs. Those are just little carriers that carry the triglycerides and cholesterol all around your body. These little fat mobiles come to your fat cell and they take this triglycerides and put them in your fat cell. They can keep doing that. And as the fat cells fills up bigger and bigger, eventually you're going to try to put some more triglycerides in that fat cell. And that individual fat cell is too full. It can't hold any more triglycerides. So it says, oh, sorry, I'm stuffed. Take it to another fat cell. When this fat cell, and this is huge, when this fat cell, just take one fat cell, when it gets so full of triglycerides that it can't hold anymore, that's called insulin resistance. So there's nothing wrong with your cell. It's taking in the fat just like it's supposed to. There's nothing wrong with the insulin. The insulin is trying to tell the fat cell to take this triglycerides. It's just too full. And there's nothing wrong with your pancreas. You're producing enough insulin. The fact is your fat cell is just too full. Now, remember, you have fat cells all over your body. So as you fill up one fat cell, that one is insulin resistant. As you fill up another fat cell, that one's insulin resistant. So we're filling up multiple fat cells all over our body constantly. And as each one gets full, it becomes insulin resistance. So insulin resistance, which is the same thing as prediabetes and diabetes, insulin resistance actually takes about 10, 20, 30, 40 years of constantly stuffing these fat cells until you finally get all your fat cells stuffed. Once all your fat cells are stuffed, now you don't have anywhere else to put the fat. You're still eating the glucose, so you're still turning into triglycerides. You still need to put it somewhere. So now it starts putting it around your organs. And this is when everything bad happens, is when you start storing this fat around your internal organs because you don't have anywhere to put it. And if you keep eating it, there's nothing else you can do. So that's what insulin resistance is, a fat cell that's too stuffed to be able to take on any more triglycerides. And that is what is diabetes. Okay. So pre-diabetes is because when you first out as a child, you eat glucose and then you eat the glucose, your glucose goes up, then your insulin goes up, and then glucose comes down, then your insulin comes down. So a healthy person has low insulin and low glucose. When you start to become pre-diabetic, meaning you're slowly starting to stuff all your fat cells so full that they can't do anything more, what happens is your body, it takes more and more insulin to try to push those triglycerides into your fat cells, but it can still keep your glucose levels down because you still have more fat cells to go. So as you build up more and more fat cells, it takes more and more insulin to keep that glucose low. So type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, is when you have high insulin levels and low or regular normal glucose levels. Okay, that's the kicker. Because in the medical community, we never test insulin levels. We tell everybody that it's high glucose levels. Okay. High glucose levels don't come on for decades after you start pre-diabetes. And pre-diabetes is not an A1C of 5.7 to 6.4. That's a marketing technique to get more people on diabetic medications. I'll talk about that in the next episode. Okay. So healthy, you have low insulin, low glucose. Pre-diabetic thing could go on for years is high insulin, normal glucose. So if you go into a doctor's office at that point, he sees the normal glucose, he thinks, oh, you're perfectly fine. But now you've filled up all your fat cells. You can't do anything else. So now it takes more insulin. And so now your blood glucose goes up. That's what doctors are telling you is pre-diabetes, is now that your glucose is going up. But they're wrong. You've been pre-diabetic for a long time. So once your glucose levels go all the way up, now you have high insulin and high glucose, that's full-blown diabetes. Okay, that's really important for you to know. Now, the other thing, the key three, the third key that I want you to understand. So remember, the first key was that the root cause of diabetes is insulin resistance. And I just told you what insulin resistance is. It is not high glucose. High glucose is a symptom. Key number two is that when your insulin levels are high, all you can do is store fat in your fat cells. When your insulin level is low, is all you can do is burn that fat out of your fat cells for your energy source. Now, the third key is it's not about lowering your blood glucose. Okay. It's about not getting your blood glucose high in the first place, because the medical community and food companies, everybody's talking about how can you lower this blood glucose? I'm telling you, the only reason blood glucose goes up is because you're eating it. That's the only way. Stop eating it and it will come down. You'll get off all your diabetic medications. You will lose weight. That's how you lose fat. The answer to all this is the same thing. Quit eating glucose. So key number three, it's not how to lower your blood glucose. It's how to not raise your blood glucose in the first place. I've been saying that there's like one main way that you get glucose, and that is true, and that is that you eat it. There is one other way that your blood glucose goes up, and that's when you use your stored glucose. Remember, I said 10% of your liver, which is only about 400 calories, and then 1% of each of your skeletal muscle, which is about another 2,000 calories. That's all the stored glucose you have. If you take all the glucose out of your blood and you measure all the glucose that's in your blood right now, it only comes to 2 teaspoons of glucose. So we do not need a lot of glucose. We don't want a lot of glucose. And that's why our body turns glucose into fat, because fat is an energy source that we can use later. And I'll get to that in just a little bit. But so the way you get to your stored glucose is you get stressed, whatever, that fight or flight mechanism. And I've talked about that in past podcasts. Your fight or flight mechanism has cortisol, your stress hormone, that tells your liver to take the glycogen and turn that into glucose and put that in your blood so you can have fast energy. But what you're supposed to do is have acute stress, whatever that stress is, whatever, you have that stress, but then you take care of the stress. Your stress goes down, your glucose goes down, your insulin goes down, and now you're supposed to eat the fat out of your fat cells. That's how it's supposed to be used. So glucose is only supposed to be for fight or flight energy. The fat in your fat cells is supposed to be the fat or the energy that we use all the time for all of our activities of daily living, our heart beating, our lungs breathing, our intestines moving. We're making new blood cells, new skin cells. We're making new cells all the time. Our body is using energy all the time, about 2,400 calories a day, which, as you just remembered, 2,400 calories is about all you have in your glucose stores at first. If we were supposed to use glucose for our energy source, that means that we have to eat about every 2 to 3 hours in order to keep our energy levels up. And that's exactly what the food companies have taught people to do by feeding them the kind of horrible stuff that they're feeding people. Everybody thinks it's healthy because food companies making it, and couldn't be further from the truth. That's the stuff that puts glucose in your body constantly. That's the stuff that keeps your insulin levels high constantly. And that's the stuff that's causing all the disease states. So as far as medical profession, we were always taught how to get this blood glucose down. That's why we have everybody look at your blood glucose. They're wearing CGM so they can see what foods make their glucose go high. They get a fasting glucose from their doctor with just a snapshot of where's your fasting blood glucose now. Or you can get an A1C that tells you about what your glucose was in the last 3 to 4 months. And I've talked about all these with individual podcasts, but all of it's focused on glucose. Even with the CGMs, please don't be confused. A CGM is good because it lets you know when you have food, what kinds of foods make your glucose go up. However, it doesn't tell you anything about insulin. So if you're pretty healthy, when you eat food, your glucose is going to go up, but it's going to come right back down really quickly because of your insulin. That doesn't mean that you're out of the woods. You're still turning all that glucose into fat and storing it. It's just you have enough insulin to do that right now. The other thing that the medical community does to tell you to get that glucose down, they tell you to burn it off with exercise. And I'll explain why that's crazy. That makes no sense whatsoever in just a little bit. They also tell you it's your fault. Keep eating the same glucose, just don't eat as much of it. Again, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous because no matter what glucose you eat, it's causing your insulin levels to rise, which causes the glucose to turn into fat, which causes you to store the fat in your fat cells. Okay. The other thing the medical community does is they give you medications. All type 2 diabetes medication, there's one class that actually causes you to put more glucose into your urine, excrete it out through your kidneys. So that doesn't really affect your insulin levels. But that's just one class, and there's a ton of adverse effects with those because you're pushing a lot more glucose through your kidneys than your kidneys can handle, and your body does not like high glucose. That's why it's trying to get rid of the glucose in the first place. And I'll talk about that in the next episode also. But glucose damages all the proteins in your body. So besides that one that makes you excrete more glucose, all the other medications either work by increasing your insulin, which makes insulin resistance worse, or it increases insulin sensitivity of your cells, which again makes diabetes worse because when you increase the sensitivity, all that means is now it doesn't take as much energy to stuff more fat in your fat cells. All it's doing is kicking the ball down the line. If you think you're going to get rid of type 2 diabetes with medications, you are totally wrong. That is one way to actually make your diabetes worse. The only way is to quit eating glucose. And you have 100% control over that. Okay. So please don't spend money on exercise. You're not trying to bring the glucose down, and exercise isn't going to do it anyway, but you're not bringing your glucose down. Your folks are not putting it in the first place. Remember the key. It's not about decreasing your calories and exercise more. That is not what this is all about. Makes no sense. It's also not an issue of calories in versus calorie out. It doesn't work that physiologically. It doesn't work that way. It's not about the number of calories. It's about the source of those calories. Where are those calories coming from? And there's two different sources that we use that makes energy. That's glucose and that's fat. Fat is supposed to be for our everyday energy, like I've already talked about. That's why we have fat cells all over our bodies. Glucose is supposed to be for a fight or flight. That's why we don't have very many stores of it at all. This is so important to remember. It's not about calories. It's about the source of the calories. And this brings me to key 4. You got to remember the way our body burns energy. Okay. I'm just trying to explain this. The way your body burns energy, it's most efficient. It wants to get the energy that's most quickly available. So if you're in a fight or flight situation, what's going to happen is first you're going to burn the glucose out of your blood for energy. But again, you only have 2 teaspoons. You don't have much glucose in your blood. Okay. About 400 calories. Then it's going to take the fat out of your blood, because blood is easy to get to. It's already there. It's floating around. But after that, then it goes to your stored glucose. And remember, your stored glucose, again, is about 2,400 calories. In a good hard workout, a hard lifting workout, lifting heavy weights for a full hour, you're going to burn about 400 to 800 calories. And you're not coming anywhere near this 2,400 calories, which means you're not coming anywhere near going to the fat that's stored in your fat cells. So if you think you're going to exercise to get fat out of your fat cells, please think again. That's not how it works. It's not going to happen. The only way to get fat out of your fat cells is keep your insulin levels low. Okay. And one way you improve this is, like I said, if your fat storage, you only have 2,400 calories. Your maintenance basal metabolism is about 2,400 calories. So that's great. You could use glucose for your main energy source if all you're going to do is sleep for 24 hours, and then you're going to burn through all of it. So you're going to have to be careful, because you're going to have to wake up in between and you have to put more glucose in your body. Crazy. Okay. When you work out, like I said, it takes 400 to 800 calories. You already have 2,400 just in your stored glucose. So you're never going to get to that. Okay. And the other reason is it also makes you hungry. That's why, since most of us are using glucose, because it's either one or the other. If you eat glucose, your insulin levels go high, and that forces you to use the glucose for your energy source. If you don't eat glucose, your glucose is going to be low, your insulin levels are going to be low, and you're going to be using your fat. So if you're one of these people who eat glucose every 2 to 3 hours, every single day, every day of your life, which most people are, that's why our diabetic rates are going up so high. You don't have much energy. So that's why you eat this glucose. It does not keep you full at all. And so you have to eat again. And that's why people who eat carbohydrates for their main energy source, they are hungry all the time. That's why they can't imagine these people who are doing the keto and carnivore that can go days without eating. People who eat carbohydrates, they can't even fathom that. And that's why when you eat keto, when you eat carnivore, when you use your fat for your energy source, you have plenty of energy on board. You don't have to keep eating it. And that is huge. Okay. The other thing, so some of the food that you eat only gets used for energy and only gets stored in a little bit, and that's glucose. So when you eat glucose, the only thing you can use that for energy. Now let's look at fat. When you eat fat, fat is a fantastic source of calories, fantastic source of energy. Carbohydrates, you only get 4 calories per gram. Fat, you get 9 calories per gram. But fat is also used for so many other things. Like I said, with all the glucose stores in your body, you have about 2,400 calories. In just 1 pound of fat, you have 4,000 calories in 1 pound. So if you're 10 pounds overweight, you've got 40,000 extra calories stored in your fat cells because you've been keeping your insulin levels high. That's why it's in there. Okay. But you can get it back out by keeping your insulin levels low. But fat is not only an energy source, it's a fantastic energy source. That's what proves that that's the fat, that's the energy we're supposed to be using. That's why God made us where we can have all that energy on board, because now we eat anytime we want to, it's all around us. And that's why we're in the shape we're in. However, goes centuries back, and they didn't have food around them all the time. They needed to use that fat on their fat cells to be able to fuel them. But the other thing fat's used for, every single cell in your body is made out of fat. Fat helps cushion your organs. It helps cushion your joints when you walk. A lot of hormones are made out of fat, like cortisol, vitamin D, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. These need fat and cholesterol. You need fat for fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. You need fat for temperature regulation. That's what helps you get warm or to cool off. And you have some fat that's only there for storage, which is white fat, but you also have brown fat that actually helps produce heat. And so you've got 2 different kinds. What makes brown fat, the one that produces heat, the one that actually burns calories, what makes that turn into white fat? High insulin levels. What makes white fat turn into brown fat is low insulin levels. So there's so many different reasons why when you use glucose for an energy source, you're killing yourself. And when you use fat for an energy source, you are healing yourself. And this isn't just about energy, okay? This isn't an energy issue, a calories in, calories out, or let's get that glucose down by working out. It's not about that. This is physiology. There's only one thing that determines whether you store fat or whether you burn it. And I've said it over and again because I think people need to hear it. That is insulin. Insulin is the one that controls everything that you're doing. Even though the medical community doesn't want you to think about that, that one thing is that what makes us fat, what makes us insulin resistant, what makes us type 2 diabetics is all insulin. It's all about insulin. And so what we want to do is we want to, as medical community, what we try to do is we try to get it down. Okay. But what I'm trying to tell you to do is don't get it up in the first place. Okay. You can control what you eat, but physicians, they've only been taught about glucose. They haven't been taught about insulin. And so that's all they know is to tell you to exercise more and to decrease your calories because that's all they know. They don't understand how insulin works, how glucose works. We weren't taught that. I didn't know that. This isn't about your physician. That has nothing to do with them. This is about the people who are teaching our physicians, teaching our doctors of pharmacy, teaching our nurses. Those are the ones who are giving the false information. So when it comes to physicians, a lot of physicians, what they do is one, they don't tell you about what causes diabetes. One, because they don't know. Even if they do know that it's because you're eating too much glucose, which they don't because they still go by the food pyramid, that the food pyramid is based off nothing but glucose. If you go by the marketing food pyramid that was made from the sugar industry to the food companies, the entire pyramid is made out of glucose. They want you eating glucose. They want you sick because that's how they make lots of money. And it never keeps you full. So you're hungry all the time. So one, physicians don't know. So they're going to let you decide whether you want to cure your diabetes or not. They say it takes too much time to explain to you about eating. Okay. So that's why your doctors aren't going to be where you're going to get the information. It's so much easier to give you a pill or give you an injection than to tell you to control what you eat. Because remember, all medications work by increasing your insulin or increasing insulin sensitivity. So diabetic medications makes diabetes worse. Okay. Now, there are some foods that have a strong effect on food. Okay. As soon as you eat this food, your glucose levels go up. As soon as your glucose levels go up, your insulin levels go up. As soon as your insulin levels go up, it brings your glucose down and makes you ravenously hungry. And so you eat more of that food. Now, there's other food that you eat that keeps your glucose levels down. You don't put glucose into your body. So that keeps your insulin levels down. Also, while your glucose is down and your insulin levels are down, you're feeding off your fat. So you're never hungry. You always feel full. So you've got to eat the types of food that don't put glucose into your blood. That is the key to all this. So when you look at the types of food, there's plant-based foods, there's animal-based foods, and there's chemical-based foods. So I'll talk just real quick. I'll talk about that. Plant-based foods, anything that comes from a plant. So if you've got something on your fork or your spoon and you look at it, say, did that come from an animal? If it did not come from an animal, then it came from a plant. All plants contain glucose, some more than others, and some are way more than others. So all plant-based foods are made out of protein and carbohydrates. The basic building block of protein is amino acids, and the basic building block of carbohydrates is glucose. So all plant-based foods contain carbohydrates, which means they contain glucose. Now, when you look at animal-based foods, they're all made out of protein and they're made out of fat. Okay. Fat does not raise your insulin levels at all. So that's why when they say eating fat's what makes you fat, it makes no sense. These are the people who are trying to get your money and know nothing about physiology. Okay. Protein can raise your insulin levels just a tiny bit, your glucose levels a tiny bit. But I think, and I still need to research this, I think that is because of the protein. If you're talking about protein that's a meat, remember meat, every single skeletal muscle has its own little glycogen store. It's only 1%, but still glycogen. So when you eat meat, you are putting a little bit of glucose in your blood. So if you eat a lot of meat, you are going to get a lot of glucose. So you got to be careful with that also. but it's really tiny amount compared to what's in plant foods. Okay. So animal-based foods, fat doesn't raise your glucose at all. Protein does just a little bit. Glucose, which comes from carbohydrates, that's where it all comes from. And man-made food is the chemical-based food, and that is what is killing us. Man-made food in the box, bottle, bag, and can, it's all made out of ultra-processed carbohydrates, which means it's all made out of glucose. Then they throw sugar and high fructose corn syrup in there, which is more glucose. And then fructose gets turned immediately into glucose. And then they also put the seed oils. So everything that you get from man-made food with a label on it, with a list of all the ingredients, of all the chemicals they put on there, that's the food that is killing us. That's the food that's raising our glucose, raising our insulin, causing an obesity, causing diabetes, which means it's causing everything. It's causing renal failure, liver failure, heart failure, brain failure. Every single organ in our body is failing because of this type of food, and we've got to quit eating it. Remember, when insulin goes up, when you give a medication to raise your insulin, or when you do it naturally, insulin doesn't make glucose just disappear. It's, oh, good, I've got this and my glucose levels are down. The reason your glucose levels are down is because they've turned it into triglycerides and they're stuffing it in your fat cells. So don't be fooled by the fact that your glucose is down. Just like you shouldn't be fooled with the fact that if you're taking a medication or something that's causing you to lose weight, remember, it's causing you to lose weight because you're not eating. You have to eat protein. You have to eat vitamins and minerals. You have to eat fat. You have to eat that. If you don't, your body's going to get it from what you already have. So if you don't eat fat or glucose, yes, your body's going to get the fat out of your fat cells, but you're also not eating protein. So it's going to get the protein out of your muscle cells, which means that people are on these stupid diets or on these injectable medications, they are losing more muscle than they are fat. They're happy because they're losing weight, but they're going to be very upset when they find out as they get older that their muscle is way decreased, because that is also the key to health as you get older. So now we know what diabetes is. We know what causes it. So next week, we'll talk about what you can do to reverse it. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, stay nourished and stay well. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button below and be sure to tell someone else who may want to change their health path as well. And remember, if you would like to enroll in our new online Thrive Naturally Transformation course to help you reach your new improved health goal, to reverse type 2 diabetes, feel great, and get off medications, we are here to help. Just go to our website, drstevehewlett.com, and click on the Work With Us tab at the top of the page. We truly are here to help you get off medications and start living the vibrant, pain-free life that you would love to live.